It all started with a normal flight. At least that's how it seemed at first. People were boarding like usual, some smiling, some tired, dragging their carry-ons down the aisle and looking for their seats. Among them was a successful black businesswoman, calm, professional, the kind of person who always draws quiet respect when she walks into a room. She was dressed sharply, her bag neatly packed, and she had no idea that this flight would soon make headlines across the country. What happened next would spark national conversations, shift billions in corporate dollars, and change more than one life forever. Just a few rows back sat a black teenage boy, 17, maybe 18. He was quiet too, headphones on, scrolling through something on his phone. He had a kind face, one of those kids who notices when someone needs help and doesn't think twice. He was flying alone, probably heading home from school or visiting family, his backpack tucked under the seat. He had no clue that he was about to become part of a moment that millions of people would talk about. A moment that would remind the world how powerful one small act of kindness can be. But first, the calm shattered. As the plane filled up, a brief conversation turned tense. Flight attendants hovered near the front. Whispers traveled through the rows. Eyes shifted. Then security showed up. 3 officers, serious faces, quiet voices. They walked up to the black woman, no shouting, no explanation that passengers nearby could hear. But moments later, she was being escorted off the plane. No one really knew why. Her seat wasn't causing any issue, her bag fit just fine. She hadn't raised her voice or refused to follow any instructions. Still, she was gone. Just like that. Passengers looked around. Some were uncomfortable. A few mumbled questions. Others lowered their gaze. But no one stopped it. No one really could stop it. Except maybe her. What no one knew then was that she wasn't just a passenger. She was a major investor, a high-ranking executive, a woman with deep connections and a quiet but powerful influence over the kind of funding that airlines depend on. And what had just happened to her? It wasn't going to be swept under the rug, but while all eyes were on that moment, on the injustice, the silence, the unsettling way it all went down, another story was quietly unfolding just a few seats away. The pregnant woman had boarded late. Her belly was noticeable, her face tired. She looked down the aisle, hoping someone might help. That's when the teen stood up, didn't say much, just offered her his seat near the front. She hesitated for a second, then smiled and accepted. No drama, no attention, just a simple gesture. But what he didn't realize was that she wasn't just another passenger either, and she wasn't going to forget what he did. As the plane finally took off, tension still lingered in the air. Whispers filled the cabin. People sent quiet texts. One woman looked at her husband, confused. A man in row 22 shook his head slowly. But no one could have predicted what would come next. How this single flight would ripple far beyond the airport gates, beyond corporate boardrooms, beyond news headlines. Because when the woman removed from the plane made her next call, everything started to shift. And when the teenager landed and opened the note the pregnant woman had handed him before deboarding, his whole life changed in one unbelievable moment. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To truly understand how everything unfolded, the $4 billion decision, the viral note, and the unexpected bond that formed between strangers, we need to rewind. Go back to that flight, that moment, that choice, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about planes or policies. It's about people, about power, about quiet courage and unexpected kindness. And trust me, by the time this story is done, you'll see why this wasn't just a flight. It was a turning point. And it all began when one woman got pulled off, and another handed a folded piece of paper that would change a young man's life forever. But what exactly did that note say? And what did the airline lose when they underestimated the wrong woman? Keep watching, because what happens next? You won't believe how far it goes. Her name was Ava Jordan. You might not know it now, but in boardrooms across industries, tech, finance, transportation, her name carried weight. She wasn't loud about her power. She didn't have to be. Ava built her influence the hard way, through years of quiet, determination, smart investments, and always knowing when to speak and when to listen. But that day on the plane, no one saw the executive or the philanthropist. All they saw was a black woman in first class who, for some reason, made someone uncomfortable. That's all it took. Ava had arrived early, checked in with no issues, and was seated with her tablet open, reading over notes for a deal that had been months in the making. The airline, ironically, was one of the companies she'd been considering for a major infusion of funding through a private equity group she quietly advised. $4 billion. That's what was on the table. A deal that could expand routes, modernize fleets, create jobs. She'd been doing her homework, watching how they operated from top to bottom. And that flight? It was part of her due diligence. So, when security walked up, politely but firmly asking her to step off the plane, it was more than humiliating. It was revealing, and not in the way the airline had intended. The reason they gave? A seating dispute. Supposedly, a passenger had complained she was in the wrong seat. But she wasn't. She had the digital boarding pass. She'd followed every step. No confrontation, no scene. Still, they asked her to leave, and when she tried to ask questions, she was met with silence and cold stares. The cabin crew avoided her gaze. No one spoke up. Ava didn't argue. She quietly gathered her things, stood up, and walked off the plane with the same grace she always carried. But inside, something snapped. Not with anger, but clarity. She'd spent decades funding innovation, backing entrepreneurs, and encouraging companies to do better, not just in profits, but in how they treat people. And now, the same airline she was about to help expand had shown her exactly where they stood. Back in row 17, the teenage boy who gave up his seat didn't see everything that happened up front. He noticed the mood shift. He saw a woman being escorted off and people whispering. But his focus was elsewhere, on the tired, pregnant woman he'd just helped. Her name was Claire. She looked like she'd had a rough day, maybe a rough few months. She smiled at him and thanked him more than once as she sat down. He nodded, a little shy, not expecting anything in return. That's just who he was. His name was Jallen, and he had dreams, big ones. He wanted to be an engineer, loved building things, taking apart machines, figuring out how stuff worked. His grades were solid, and he'd been applying for scholarships, hoping to make it into a good college. But life hadn't made it easy. His mom worked 2 jobs, his dad wasn't around. Every step forward took real effort. That flight was supposed to be a break, a chance to visit his cousin in another city and just breathe for a bit. He didn't know that one small decision, offering his seat, was about to redirect his path. Claire noticed him even before he stood up. She'd been scanning the cabin, trying not to look too desperate, but her feet were swollen, her back aching. The seat assigned to her was way in the back, and the idea of squeezing past the rows made her eyes water. That's when she saw Jallen. He caught her looking, and without even asking why, he stood and offered his place. Something about it hit her deep. Not just the kindness, but the timing. She'd been dealing with her own battles, alone, anxious about what kind of world she was bringing a child into. As she sat in the seat he gave up, she felt something shift. She didn't know his name, but she watched him shuffle to the back, settle into a tighter space, still calm, still quiet. People like him didn't always get seen, but she saw him. And as she sat there, she made a decision. She pulled a small notepad from her bag, scribbled something quickly, folded it, and tucked it into an envelope she always carried for emergency cash. Then she slipped the envelope into her purse and waited. She'd hand it to him just before they got off the plane. Meanwhile, Ava sat in the airport lounge, completely calm on the outside. She didn't rush to call her lawyer. She didn't post online. What she did instead was open her tablet and send a quiet but firm message to the investment board overseeing the airline's funding proposal. It was simple. I've made my decision. I can't recommend we move forward with this deal. That's it. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. The numbers were enough. When someone of her reputation speaks, people listen. And, just like that, the airline lost its biggest opportunity in years. Back on the plane, things had settled into a quiet rhythm. No one knew what was unraveling behind the scenes. No one saw the invisible string connecting Ava, Jallen, and Claire. But the string was there, and it was pulling tighter. When the flight landed, Jallen waited patiently like everyone else, scrolling his phone, earbuds in. As he stood to leave, Claire tapped his shoulder gently and handed him the envelope. She smiled again, but this time, there was something more in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Please open this later." He nodded, a little confused, but took it. Then she was gone. Jallen didn't open it right away. He tossed it in his backpack and made his way off the plane. But later, sitting at his cousin's kitchen table, he pulled it out. Inside the envelope was a note, neatly written, a short message, and below that, a check. When he saw the amount, his hands started to shake. But before we get to what that note said, and how it would open doors Jallen never imagined, we need to go back again. Back to Ava. Because the fallout from that flight didn't stop at one lost deal. Word spread quietly at first, then louder. Calls were made, meetings were canceled, emails got forwarded. And soon people started to ask questions. Why was Ava Jordan removed from that plane? And more importantly, how many times had something like this happened to someone without power? That's the part no one was ready for. And we haven't even gotten to the twist that brought all three of their stories crashing together in the most unexpected way. Because as powerful as Ava's pull was, and as generous as Claire's gesture became, there was still one connection left to uncover, one that none of them saw coming. But that's for the next chapter, because right now, we're still sitting in that moment, that quiet tension, that question lingering in the air. What happens when one act of injustice costs billions, and one act of kindness changes everything? Stay tuned.